What's up, folks? I am Jayme Bedingfield. This is Too Many Words, a podcast for writers and readers, night owls, and sunshine chasers. Welcome to the show. You rock for tuning in. You also rock for leaving a great review on iTunes and Stitcher. The not so subtle reminder, reviews help so much. Please leave them. I know it's a big pain to get all in there. I really appreciate your time. I'm excited for this week. I am here with Jerry Gordon, and if you are a regular listener, then you know that I've been reading his an ARC of the Breaking the World and talking about how awesome it is. I love apocalyptic stories. This one is outstanding, and it goes so much deeper than so many. But before I get all into talking about it, let's talk about it with Jerry Gordon. Hey, Jerry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jayme. It's great to be here.
I am super excited. I had just a blast reading Breaking the World.
Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear. I'm just starting to get feedback from people, and it's been absolutely wonderful.
That's awesome. Have you been nervous about that part of it?
Well, it's just that, a book lives inside your head for it. This took me a couple years to research and write and revise and, to get it actually into something that, I could put in your hands. So, along the way, there have been, pre-readers and editors involved, but it going out to the kind of early critics has, the response has been phenomenal. It's really felt great.
Yeah, I bet. But no, it really is. I am a huge fan of apocalyptic fiction. My mind lives in that world a lot. So the fact that you said it during the standoff in Waco just added so many interesting layers to it.
Thank you. There's a long tradition in literature of grounding fictional stories in real world settings, and you can go all the way back to stuff like the Scarlet Letter and find it. Or when I was a kid, the big book that kind of blew my mind was a book by Michael Crichton called Eaters of the Dead, which kind of took a piece of history and then kind of ran with it.
Did you find it challenging to blend, the fiction aspects with the real events?
Oh yeah, and I should say that I kind of backed into the idea of using Waco in this way for the story. Originally, I wrote a short story in a post-apocalyptic setting, and I needed a character that had been kind of shattered religiously, somebody who absolutely didn't believe. And in the short story, because I had grown up and seen the standoff happen, I used David Koresh as kind of a religious boogeyman. And so the story had that aspect to it. This person kind of haunted by Waco, and it also referred quite a bit to this prior event called the Breaking of the World. And I didn't really plan on writing a book after that, but I had readers. They kept coming up to me and they kept asking about Koresh and the Branch Davidians, and they kept asking about the Breaking of the World and what that was about. And the more they asked, the more I kind of, in the back of my mind, just kept playing with the idea till I decided I'd do a little more research, which led to a little more research. And, so I kind of backed into it. I'd love to say that it was a master plan, but it wasn't. And then as far as the challenges of blending it with real events, there's a lot of stuff that you have to work with. So you've read the book. In reality, inside that church were over 100 people. And, for dramatic purposes, you have to combine some of the things they're doing, because you're not going to read a book where I jump around 100 different people to get you there. You need a strong sense of a viewpoint and a geography to work with as a reader. So, there was some work there. I made a decision early on to anonymize the participants of the church. So David Koresh, I kind of view as a public figure. So I used his name, but for other people, if you knew a lot about the standoff, you would recognize who they are. But I changed the names to give them their privacy.
Okay.
I felt like that was, these were people, these were nurses and lawyers and retired police officers who were living and worshiping at this church, and they didn't want to be public figures, so I decided to change the names. And then you really you're looking at the events, and you're kind of looking to find that greater truth. You're fictionalizing them, but you're looking to be true to what happened, and to make it relevant to people today. There are plenty of nonfiction books that are out there on the subject, but none of them really give you a feel for what it's like to be on the inside in a situation like that, or that if you're reading the book, you're being hit with issues, of how the news can be used to mislead, how law enforcement can overreach, Second Amendment issues, the line between religion and cult, and these are all things that are these are big issues today.
They really are. Even as, a reader of the book, you completely changed my perspective on what happened in Waco. Perspective is such a powerful thing, and as a writer, you get to play with that and explore different things.
I really wanted to humanize the participants of the event. When I was doing the short story, I started doing just a little bit of superficial research because it was just a short story. And I was looking at videos of David Koresh just to kind of get a feel for, how does he talk? How does he move? What's his demeanor? And, having lived through the standoff, I expected one thing. And when I actually started looking, there was an Australian documentary that was really interesting. There's also tapes of him, if you want to go on YouTube, that were taken during the standoff inside by church members.
Really?
Yeah. It's really well. What's really interesting about that, and this is kind of is a diversion a little bit to what we're talking about, but if you're saying that I really kind of changed your perspective on it, and my perspective was changed a great deal too. One of the big issues with Waco is the fact that when the ATF raided the church and everything went badly, FBI came in and they moved the press a mile and a half away from the actual standoff. So the press had actually no access at all to what was going on.
Wow.
They're only basically, and this was a time when you had 3 channels and CNN, for news.
Right.
So all of those news services were reporting for 51 straight days about this standoff, but none of them were actually there. They were cordoned off a mile and a half away, listening to press conferences that were given by the FBI. So their entire perspective was the outside perspective being handed to them. The book came out yesterday, which was the 25th anniversary, and 25 years later, we have a huge amount of information that wasn't available at the time, and it paints a much different picture. But the reason why there's such a difference between, and I've talked to other people about this, between what they imagined this to be and what it really was, is because the news media that was giving you that information wasn't actually there. They couldn't confirm the story or the perspective that they were being given. So, it's a real cautionary tale as far as freedom of the press goes.
Yeah, it definitely is. And as far as people are going to believe what with the pieces that they have. So if they don't have the other perspective, it's just not available to them.
Well, and what I wanted to do with the story from a perspective point of view is doing research. It started with Koresh and the fact that he really didn't come off as the type of person he was sold as. If I had to describe him, or actually, I read enough interviews with people describing him. They often called him awkward, soft-spoken. He was very self-effacing. Repeatedly, I found people who described him as underwhelming, which is very different from the point of view that the news media gave me, and led to questions that led to a little bit of research. And the more I researched, the more questions I had. Eventually I had enough questions that they kind of demanded answers in the form of a novel. But from a perspective point of view, I wanted to write something from the inside that gave you a perspective of what it was like on the inside, because everybody already has the outside perspective.
Right.
But I didn't want to write from the perspective of a true believer. I didn't want to write from somebody who was a Branch Davidian. I didn't want to write that book. I didn't think people would want to read that book. But the the people who came to Waco, it was really a Christian commune. It was a offshoot of the Seventh Day Adventist Church. The people who came there brought their families with them, and that meant bringing kids, kind of dragging them there, and that became the answer for me, that I was going to tell the story from the perspective of three atheist teenagers whose parents had dragged them there, who they didn't believe in what the Branch Davidians believed, but they also were at odds with the government and the FBI. So it became a kind of a neutral point of view, that I could ask questions about both sides and really kind of uncover the truth on both sides.
Yeah, I bet that was fun exploring that situation as a teenager. Fun might be the wrong word, but an
But
interesting set of eyes to look at this situation through the eyes of teenagers that are forced to be in that situation.
well, I mean, the nice thing from a writer's point of view is they're in conflict with everyone.
Yes.
There, so that there's a lot of rich material there. Um, the other nice thing was, it made the book their perspective. I really loved the characters that I was writing, the three teenagers, and I really enjoyed writing the book from their perspective. So it took the a little bit of the dark edge off of it.
I have to say, I love those three teenagers. I was very, very much invested with their well-being by the end of it. And I also have to say that I found myself really rooting for David.
I mean, he was a really interesting character to try and write. And I started from an exterior point of view, because I'd written a short story. Really, what are his mannerisms, the aviator glasses, the way he kind of moves and thinks and talks. But he was the biggest challenge of the novel, really,
I bet.
because the chronology of what happens in the attack and stuff, that's pretty easy to work with. Um, but what I really wanted was, I wanted somebody who knew who he was to go, yeah, that's him. That took an immense amount of work. Like I said, I did have access to some stuff. The Australian documentary, the tapes that they filmed, which there's an interesting story about. But that there was a point for me where I really understood him, and actually it became the point where the main character Cyrus, for me, really understood him as well. It kind of, my point became his point. There's a point in the book where Cyrus is looking at him, and he realizes whether Koresh is who he really thinks he is or not. That Koresh has been walking around believing that he has this weight on his shoulders, and that whether it's real or not, that it's such an incredibly huge burden. And for me, that was kind of the key to him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool moment.
As far as the tape thing goes, we were talking about kind of freedom of the press and the press being pulled away. At one point, in an attempt to get the Branch Davidians to come out in the middle of the standoff, the FBI gave them a camcorder and said, film your stories, and we'll give them to the press, and we'll put them out, and you'll feel like your story is out there, and then come out. They tried to lure them out that way. And the Branch Davidians took the camcorder, and they filmed these testimonies, and I wrote a chapter in the book that kind of does this. But they talked about who they were, where they came from, why they decided to come to Waco, and why they were there studying, and that they weren't there against their will, and all that sort of thing. And these tapes, which you can find on YouTube now, were handed back to the FBI, and the FBI sequestered them. They did not release them to the press. And 25 years later, you have access to a lot of documents. And behind the scenes in the FBI, there was a huge concern that if you release these tapes, it would humanize the Branch Davidians, and that they would be seen as normal people, and that might cause the general public to question why tanks were surrounding a church in America.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, you can watch these. They come off. I mean, I don't personally share their beliefs, but they don't come off as crazy. And you'd be surprised how many people are just floored when I just mention something as simple as the idea of the fact that their church was composed of lawyers and nurses and doctors and retired police officers, because the narrative that the government pushed with the press so far away from the standoff was that these were apocalyptic cultists, and the reality of the situation is much more interesting and complex.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you get that across so well. It seems very complex, and all these people, they don't come across as crazy at all, in your book, and the fact that they're a family is it adds to that.
I kind of feel like if you're reading it and you're thinking of them as real people, then I've done what I was setting out to do, which is to really kind of put a human face on this and strip away the mythology of and I was talking about this a little bit on John Scalzi's blog yesterday, but there's a whole mythology surrounding what happened at Waco that has nothing to do with the actual facts of what happened at Waco. And I think it's really easy for us as a society to categorize somebody in that way and remove the humanity of the situation. And I'm not sure that's particularly good for us.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, it is way too easy to take away the humanity there.
And I don't want to in any way sound holier than thou. I grew up. My stepfather was an FBI agent. What I watched on TV was what I was sure was happening, and I was really floored as I dug into congressional testimony, because after the tragedy, there were congressional hearings. There were internal investigations. At one point, there was enough evidence that was missing or destroyed that there were calls for obstruction of justice investigations into officials of the FBI and the ATF. So, the whole situation is much different than what was portrayed.
Well, that must be, yeah, extra interesting for you to kind of discover that.
But it's kind of what drove my questions about why the church did what they did and why the government did what they did. That's really what drove the book. And for me, I wanted to be able to put those questions out there. And since you've had a chance to read the book, I mean, it it's pretty apparent that there are a lot of questions to ask about why things were done the way they were done.
Hmm. So you are also an editor. Is it like challenging for you to quiet that editing voice as you're writing?
Yeah, I'm exceedingly hard on my own work, and I'm very comfortable working with people that are very clear and direct about what they like and don't like. That's one of the benefits of editing, is you recognize that the process is about making your work look good, and so it's really a wonderful thing and not a combative thing. So I'm my co-editor on the Dark Faith series, Maurice Broaddus, posted yesterday. Congratulations on the novel. It's about time. So I've probably hidden in the shadows longer than I should, but as just my personality by default seems to be to kind of hang back and try and really master something and then do it. So I was probably ready sooner, and I'm not sure if that's the editor in me that's made that harder, or that's just a quirk of my personality. But it is certainly gratifying to put out your first novel, and you know uh, I've had nothing but like through the roof reviews of it, and it's that I got the first one and I was like, well, that's awesome. That will cushion me when the next one like crushes the book. And then the second one was positive, and the third one, and then it was just like, well, I hope the book comes out and I don't get crushed, and so it's been really wonderful. There are a tremendous amount of benefits to being an editor and writing, but I'm not sure that they really focus on how easy it is to write. The big benefit, I would say, is that in doing pro rate anthologies, To give you an idea, you're talking about 20 to 25 stories in a book. The last one I did, we received 1,500 submissions.
Wow.
So you're gonna. So first of all, so there are 25 stories, but really probably half of those, if it's one of my anthologies, are going to go to established writers. So those 1,500 submissions are fighting for 12 slots, 13 slots, and it's when you're reading that many submissions, it really hones your opinions about what works and what doesn't, and allows you to kind of deconstruct things and figure them out.
I bet. I bet it does.
So in that way, it's extremely useful to me as a writer. As far as, but like I said, as far as how editing helps me when I sit down and write, your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just like, because, you're also an editor, so you're working that muscle. For me, I'll say this. If I was like exercising that muscle in the way that you explained with like, all the submissions and stuff, I feel like that voice would just be extra loud as I'm trying to just draft and get the story out.
I do remember a point when I was writing this, and one of the benefits of writing this was I was writing this between. I started working on it after the 20th anniversary, but well before the 25th anniversary. But there was a publisher interested, and there was kind of some deadlines in play that forced me to get out of my own way. I couldn't overthink it. I had to just get in there and do it and make it happen.
That really does help. You just have to get it out. So as far as like, are you working on something else right now?
Yeah, I have actually. There were a couple publishers interested in this book, and one of the ones that didn't get it came back to me and said, "What else are you working on?" And there's a science fiction book that I'm working on that they were really interested to see. So I've got a draft of that, and I'm in the middle of doing a revision right now, and it has to be turned in later this year. So as soon as kind of the launch stuff calms down, I'll be digging down pretty hard to finish that.
That's exciting.
Yeah, yeah. It's a the thing is that this is Breaking the World is a very claustrophobic book in a way. It's about people trapped in a very tense situation with these huge events swirling around them. This book is huge in scope. So it's the reverse of the challenge. So instead of the challenge being, to really give you that tense claustrophobic feel, this is, it's then moving to a very epic scale.
When you're dealing with such a big imaginary world, at least for me, it can be very challenging to still stay contained where you need to be. You have this whole big world, you just use the pieces that you need to tell the story.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, as far as writing goes, I'm very much of a hybrid writer. I plan to an extent, but I need some room for improvisation at the same time. The way I like to think about it is like when you're taking a trip somewhere you really want to go. Generally, there's a reason you really want to go there, and there's some things you want to see. But if you over plan it, instead of this really enjoyable vacation, it feels like work. And for
Totally.
me, for me, it's definitely like that when it comes to writing. I definitely need a sense of where I'm going. A lot of times, I'll have a really good idea at the beginning, some ideas of what's going to happen, and where I want to land it. But I try not to get so specific that it feels like I have a list of things on a sheet of paper. Okay, now I've got to do A, B, C. Because then it kind of takes the joy out of it.
Oh, it totally does. Well, and then you're not, I mean, I've slammed myself into walls that way before by over outlining because then I don't have that sense of like I need to find something.
It really, I mean, for me, the first novel that I attempted to write, like a lot of people, I kind of wrote in isolation, disconnected, not part of a professional community yet, and I outlined that thing to death. It just was a soulless, joyless experience writing it. It just, I killed it. I killed it in through outline. So I've become a lot looser with it, and I like a good plan, but I really love it when things start happening. And one of my favorite things is when I have a plan for how the tension is going to ramp up, and having read the book, you definitely have an appreciation for this. And then as I'm kind of going along, an idea occurs to me that just cranks it up even higher, and almost scares me, and I just sit there with it for a little bit, and then it's almost always the best right decision.
No, well, and just like the act of discovering that, like, you actually surprise yourself is just it's so fun. I mean, it's like, it's kind of the
Right.
golden egg.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there are things that you just can't plan. I definitely uh, didn't go into the novel with a structural idea in my mind, but what would the relationship between the main character Cyrus and David Koresh be? And that kind of developed organically as I bounced them off each other. I just kind of created a strong sense of what each of them would be. And then when I put them in the room, I let them kind of hit off each other, and I just watched where it went. And there are a lot of there's a lot of preparation that goes on behind that. It's not all improvisation. I knew from reading. One of the things that I read was an oral history that was taken down from David Koresh's mother about what his childhood was like.
Oh, wow.
I really dug deep with the research to get to know these people, and one of the things that I learned from him, or from about him from his mother, was that at a young age he really had a really strong desire to have a simple kind of family life and kids, and maybe play the guitar on the weekends, and he was very religious. He memorized the Bible at the age of 14, but he got his first girlfriend pregnant, and at a young age, and went to her parents, and owned up to it, and offered to marry her, and they were in love, and the parents pushed him away, forced the girlfriend to have an abortion, and he was devastated by this. He was very fatherly in his approach to all of the kids that were at Waco, and you could, there's a very creepy, awful aspect to that, but you can kind of go back and see where it came from. So I had, on the one hand, this kind of this understanding of where David Koresh had grown up, and his attachment to the idea of having kids in that kind of life,
Yeah.
and then I had built this character who had been kind of dragged around, and who was essentially attached to Koresh almost like he was stepdad.
Yeah.
And I had that experience in my life, and I knew what that felt like. And so my stepfather growing up was a pretty manly FBI agent kind of guy, and I was this awkward kid. And there was nothing bad that happened. It's just we really didn't gel. It really didn't work well between the two of us. And I could kind of take some of my experiences with him in that way, and some of the experiences I had from Koresh, and that created this relationship and this dynamic that you see in the book.
The dialogue between the two of them is just phenomenal, and I love the way their relationship grows throughout the story.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
At a couple of points in this book, you have or more than a couple, but you have a lot of action going on, and you have a lot of, characters inside that action. Do you find it challenging to keep the story going and make sure that what everybody is doing is coming across in like a clear way? There's just so many different things that you're dealing with some of these scenes.
It's definitely a challenge for a number of reasons. First, even just beyond action sequences, I kind of have a natural bias. One of my degrees is in English, and you read a lot of older stuff when you're getting a degree in English. And the scene that always comes to mind for me is there's a scene that opens up The Last of the Mohicans. I don't know if you've ever read it.
I have.
Okay, it's like a 3-page description of a room,
Yes.
and it's not a bad description. I'm not knocking the book at all. It's just nobody walks into a room and thinks about things in that way. I naturally gravitate, writing wise, and I like describing things in fragments. As you walk in, you notice a thing and you think about a small thing and it bounces off another thing. And, there are all these little points that if you do it right, it's difficult, but if you do it right, then the reader kind of constructs their own reality out of it.
Mhm.
So just going into writing in general, that's kind of how I like to do it. You add action to that, and all of a sudden, you just you've amped it up entirely. To me, you have to have kind of a pinpoint focus of the character who's going through this. You have to feel like you're really in them as they're going through this thing.
Mhm.
And that's a challenge right there. You really have to be judicious about what you're stopping to explain or describe, because it needs to have a kind of an impressionistic, frenetic pace to it.
Mhm.
I've been known to push that too far. A lot of I had less trouble with it later in the book. I spent a lot of time working on the opening of the book. Where the ATF is attempting to raid the church, and all this is going on, and the main character, who's unaware of what's going on, is kind of trapped in the middle of this moment.
Mhm.
That took a lot of work to get that to the point that it had the pace that it needed, but that I didn't lose people or confuse people.
I bet that was challenging. I mean, especially, those beginning those beginning chapters have the big job of getting the reader comfortable. It's hard. I'm actually working on this right now with revisions, as I have action scenes at the beginning of the book, but you need to be invested in the character to even care about the action, you know?
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely that. There was a big push and pull with that at the very beginning of the book, because you need to root somebody, but I'm essentially telling a story that starts right at a gun battle.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of beginning with the character that I worked on really hard, just to try and draw you in really quickly, and give you a sense of the character, because when you are running for your life, you're not giving a lot of inner monologue background into who you are and what you think about the world. And so it was a real challenge to construct it in a way that I could work with some events that happened during the actual standoff. So, like, for example, in the first chapter, when Cyrus is running down the hall, and you have the gentleman who was eating breakfast in bed and got shot, that person is a real person. That really happened. The police officer upstairs who got shot, that really happened. The grenade thing really happened. I'm kind of weaving around these things that are part of the actual history, but I've got to do them in a way that makes you feel like you're running for your life, and still get you invested in the character. It was really tough to do.
I bet.
Uh,
I bet it was.
later on, as the action intensifies later, it's much easier, because now you know who everybody is and you care about everybody, and so now it's a lot easier thing to pull off.
Well, and even like you as the writer, at that point you're just a little bit more comfortable inside. You've been at this for so many words now. So, but like beginnings are tough in general.
Yeah, you're always monkeying with the fact that you have kind of an entry point that you want for a story, but what the audience needs also is there as well. Quite honestly, we were talking about point of view earlier, and picking that kind of neutral point of view that could question all sides.
Yeah.
That actually didn't happen at the beginning. I started this story. The short story that led to this book was somebody in the future who had been a true believer and had had their belief shattered. So when I decided to write it as a book, I was just a little naturally beholden to the story, and I made them a true believer. And I started writing it that way, and it very quickly just didn't work. I didn't want that point of view. These people are kind of trapped and surrounded by the FBI. But if you're a true believer, there's no real conflict going on inside, and a
That's
lot of the book
true.
takes place inside. There was trial and error, and just even finding the right point of view for it.
That's such an interesting part of this whole thing, is like you can have a story and you know what the story is, or you have an idea, but then there's the whole different thing of how you tell the story.
Right, right. I was having a beer with a local writing friend, Rodney Carlstrom, who has been working on kind of the world building aspect of this story. He's been working on for quite some time. I've been trying to push him to write and to, just kind of pick. And we started talking about it. And I'm like, okay, look, this is all really nice. You're building the theme park around the ride. We need to build the ride. And I'm like, you've got all this great material. I'm telling you it's really interesting, but you have to pick a character and a story that is going to take people through all this great material. And that was the case with this book as well. It was, I had all these questions about Waco, and I had this post-apocalyptic story, and I kind of wanted to bring them together into this really cool thing. But what is the story you're going to tell? Some things come at you really easily. Some don't. I had to play with the viewpoint for a while. If you want to talk about things that occur to you once you've got a draft in your hand, I handed a draft over to pre-readers and started reading it myself. I had not consciously done this, but I was looking at the book and I was starting to realize that the whole story is really an extended metaphor for growing up. That the end of the world, what happens to these characters and facing the end of the world and all that sort of thing, it's kind of this extended metaphor for growing up.
It definitely is.
So, and that didn't, once I figured that out, once I found that, then when I went back and rewrites, I was able to, kind of really polish that. But your subconscious is going to do things. This is one of the reasons why I really kind of walked back from outlining quite a bit, was just the fact that you can't. There are all these great little things that happen in the trenches of writing individual sentences and paragraphs. That that thing that you put in because you couldn't write last week, and you would have written it differently last week, but because you got delayed and you're writing it this week, you put this little thing in that happened to you that you didn't think anything about, and then later it becomes, oh God, I can use this.
And those moments where you're like, oh wow, I didn't plan this and it's here and it's so right, they're so great. But at the same time, like, and I'll speak for me here, it's so hard sometimes to allow myself the room to do it. Like, what we were talking about with, outlining can box you in. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I'll sit down with too much of I have an outline, but I have too much of almost too much of a plan that I've boxed myself in, and I'm not, exploring with how I need to explore to find those bits. It's sometimes it's challenging to let yourself let go.
Yeah, I definitely feel that the way the frustration most often hits with me working on something, and I know when I say don't outline, I'm not a pantser. I don't just sit down and start playing. I have a good idea where I'm going. If you want to think about it like a car driving down the highway or down a dark road at night, you only need to see as far as the headlights go.
Yes.
But I can see ahead of me. I'm working towards something, and the way the frustration often plays out for me is I can tell that it's not working.
Mm.
And at first, the sense is what you're noodling around with the words and and the order, and you're moving a few small pieces of furniture around, trying to figure out how to make it work, and it's just not working. And when I was very first starting out, I would get really frustrated by that because I felt like it was a sign that I didn't know what I was doing. And what I came to understand later is that I won't say I don't get frustrated by it, but I now when it happens, I see it and I feel it as something's not right. There's something that something in the back of my head is telling me that there's a problem here, and I need to play with this a little bit. And invariably I'll walk away and I'll come back and I don't have the answer and it's still not working, and I'll walk away and come back and I still don't have the answer. But then I'll get in the shower the next morning and boom, there's the answer. Even though I've been working on other things in the back of my head, I've been working on this problem the whole time. And all of a sudden it's like really clear to me why the scene or the moment wasn't working. And if you just do A and B, and all of a sudden you start moving forward again. But those moments used to really frustrate me, and I've kind of learned a patience, to be patient and to work at it, but to let the answers come. I've been writing for what I would consider professionally for 10 years. It's a newer feeling of being able to walk away, and I find more and more that when I have a bad day, I'm able to walk away from it from a writing perspective a lot easier, and to come back and to trust that the answer is going to be there.
It does seem like, I mean, it is like and I see that as like a gradual thing because like I'm still getting pretty frustrated. I was pretty frustrated yesterday actually, um, but it's also like it's calmed down so much. Like I'm not like way back in the early the early days. And when I started, when I really was fresh starting out, I would hit that moment. It was like time to question everything. And I
Hmm.
no longer feel like I need to question everything, just half the things.
Right. I mean, I had this really frustrating time when I started because I one of the reasons why I did get an English degree was I wanted to study writing. I wanted to be a writer. And I got out of school after all of this time studying, and I just thought, well, the trick is, and all writers make this mistake when they start out, is the trick is the idea. And the trick isn't the idea. The
No, it's
idea
not.
is the easy part. It's the execution of the idea that's the trick. And I had great ideas because I had all of this accumulated knowledge and culture. I had this half of me that was very literary and this half of me that was very pop culture. And I sat down to work and it just sucked. And I could tell it sucked. I knew it wasn't working well. I wasn't delusional. I didn't know at the time, so it really made me question. Should I be doing this? Should I work harder at it? Am I just not good at this? Later on, I learned from a cognitive psychologist that something that's really interesting about how stories work in our brains from an evolutionary point of view. And this is also one of the reasons why you and I both love kind of apocalyptic fiction. It kind of ties into it. But the way your brain works when you read a story, evolutionary wise, scientists believe that storytelling is a byproduct. We tell stories to better transmit information, survival information. If I tell it to you in a story, just like you learned your ABCs through a song, the story will help you remember the things that you need to do to survive. And storytelling also functions as kind of a way to simulate survival scenarios. I'm assuming that reading a book, going to a movie, going to a play, you've had that moment where you just kind of disappear.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love those
There
moments.
yeah, I'm reading this book and I'm in it, and
Yeah.
I just totally feel it. Well, actually, that occurs because there is an analytical portion of your brain that turns itself off. Not completely off, but it kind of powers down so that you're not looking at my copy of Breaking the World in your hand and thinking, "Well, this is ink on paper and this is all a fabrication, none of this is real." Your The analytical portion of your brain kind of dials back to let you have that immersive experience because it aids in that transmission of knowledge that from an evolutionary point of view is about survival. So how this affects what I'm talking about, I go 4 years studying all the great poets and writers of the ages, and I suck at writing. Well, that whole time that I was studying and immersing myself in those books, that analytical portion of my brain is dialing back, and learning to write is a completely different set of tools than reading. And often if you talk to different writers, they will say things about learning to write like, this book was amazing and I finally decided, I just read it like 3 4 times and tore it apart structurally. And once you've read a book once, like if you went back through Breaking the World, you would be reading it in a much different way and you would notice a lot more of the structure of the story.
That's interesting. I mean, that's
So
definitely true because I have a couple of books that I've read Moby Dick at least 6 times, and
lovely.
you start to, see how the soup is made.
Right, right. And then as far as that like translates into apocalyptic fiction or dystopian fiction or that sort of thing, you're very much like this book. It's this book is the characters are trying to survive, and as you're reading it with them, there's a part of your brain that's just designed to look for how do you survive in this situation? What would I do? What are they doing? Are they doing things that I could learn from?
I
Do I
wonder
see things they're doing that, oh, you could do this thing over here? Your brain, there's a primitive part of your brain that really gets sucked into that.
it's true. I wonder if that is part of why, apocalyptic fiction is so attractive
I
to people.
I think it is. I think that there's that evolutionary component, and I think that there's a societal component. There's a reset. So no matter what your station is in life, or whether you're doing, really well or in the middle or poorly, these events occur and everybody is remade and all of the rules go away. And all of a sudden, the janitor can be the most important person in the world.
Yeah, I probably, this is a little strange to say, but it's almost like a comforting thought. Some of the apocalyptic stories, they're almost comforting because of the fact that everything is mixed up. If that,
Yeah. I mean, it sweeps away. On the one hand, it sweeps away some of the wonderful aspects of society. That then becomes that kind of challenging survival thing I'm talking about.
Mhm.
But on the other side, it sweeps away a lot of the bad. It sweeps away a lot of the conventions for how things are done that may or may not work. I'm a huge. I got hooked early. When I was 12 years old, I went on a vacation with my grandparents to Nags Head, North Carolina, or no, it was Ocean Isle Beach, right off of Nags Head, North Carolina. And I had a copy of Stephen King's The Mist
Oh,
with me,
wow.
and we were staying in this house on the beach, and I'd never been to the ocean before, and the house, to move from the upstairs to the downstairs, you had to go outside. And while we were there was a massive tropical storm that came in that killed power, and there was no way for me to go upstairs. So I was trapped in this downstairs area with this book and a flashlight. So I read Stephen King's The Mist alone in the middle of a tropical storm, and I'm
That's
trapped, and all
amazing.
these people are trapped, and it's,
I mean, scary, but a really incredible environment to read The Mist.
this novel that I've written, and my heart is kind of reminiscent of The Mist in the way of these people trapped and the religious overtones and things like that. But I'm a big fan of that. I love Richard Matheson's I Am Legend.
Oh,
I read that.
that's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, that book was a huge influence on me. It's devastating, but McCarthy's The Road
Oh, yes. It's
uh,
another great one.
is phenomenal. And I mean, it just goes on. There's The Stand, Cell. There's Brian Keene's The Rising. If you have a literary bend and you want something really strange that's the end of the world, there's a writer named Nick Mamatas who did a book called The Last Weekend, which is San Francisco after the zombie apocalypse, but it's written from the point of view of a wannabe science fiction writer with one publishing credit who kind of dreams and acts like he's Bulkowski. So he's got this whole "I'm going to drink myself to death" kind of thing going, and it's very nihilistic and very unusual.
I really need to read that. That sounds
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. If you like Bulkowski, you would really dig it.
Okay, awesome. Jerry, could you tell everybody where they can find you?
Sure. You can always find me at my website, which is jerrygordon.net. I'm on Twitter at Jerry L. Gordon. That's Gordon. And I'm on Facebook as Jerry Gordon. And of course, you can always find me and the book at apexbookcompany.com.
Jerry, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show. I had so much fun talking to you.
I just, if you don't mind, I'd just like to take a second and thank you for, you know, all the books you're reading and doing this show, because it really, it's been a wonderful experience for me to talk to you and some of the other people in the community that just really do care so much about books and really want to share that love of it. And it's been really, really heartening that you really like the book so much, and I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Now I've
You're
a
welcome.
big ear-to-ear smile to end the show. And that wraps it up for this week. Be sure to join the conversation on Twitter at me Bedingfield and Too Many Words Pod. Same names on Facebook. And of course, hop over to patreon.com/too many words. All tiers have access to the Too Many Words Discord channel. Come check it out. Come talk words. Thanks so much for tuning in. And before you click away, let others know what you think by leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, shouting it through fields of wildflowers, sharing it on social media. Be kind, drive safe. Good luck writing. Have fun. Remember to have fun. Until next time, over and out.